Hello, my fellow teachers, and welcome to Teaching with Power. This is Ben Wilcox, and this week we're going to be studying Exodus chapters 7 through 13 in the Old Testament. And I pray that both you and I will have the Spirit with us today as we study or prepare a lesson together. My hope is that what we learn from the Scriptures today is going to bless you, your families, and if you're a teacher, your students too. So if you're ready, grab your Scriptures and your marking pencils. It's time to dig deep. For an icebreaker, I like to start this lesson by asking my students which fictional characters they think would win in an imaginary battle. And they have to give at least one reason why. So, for example, Darth Vader versus Voldemort. Or how about Batman versus Iron Man, the billionaire superheroes? Jason Bourne versus James Bond. Yoda versus Gandalf. And then here's an interesting one. R2-D2 versus Wall-E. Now I know that's kind of silly, but it's a fun way to get your students talking before you dig into the more serious confrontation between the opposing forces that you find in Exodus chapter 7 through 13. And there, we're going to witness an epic battle of wills between two very powerful men, Pharaoh and Moses, both yielding very different kinds of power. Pharaoh is the great wielder of worldly power. He's a symbol for it. There's no civilization like his in the world at that time. He's the most powerful man on earth, in temporal terms. Moses, on the other hand, comes with the power of the priesthood, represented by his staff. And his objective? To free the children of Israel from bondage. Pharaoh's goal, on the other hand, is to maintain his grip on his slave labor. And he's not going to just easily let his monument-building workforce go. Who do you think is going to win that battle? Priesthood power versus worldly power. And then on a grander scale, this is really a battle of religion against religion, or God against gods. The Hebrews worship Jehovah, while the Egyptians worship a pantheon of various deities represented by different animals or forces of nature. And maybe when you were a kid, you might have said things like, "My dad is stronger than your dad," or "My brother could beat up your brother." Well, Moses is going to come in and, in a way, say, "My God can beat up your gods." To which Pharaoh responds, "Bring it on." And this confrontation is going to be played out through the episode that we call the Plagues of Egypt. But keep in mind that this contest didn't start out with a plague, but a sign. God didn't resort to the tough stuff right at the beginning. He went easy on them at first. And that sign, I believe, is a type of microcosm of the message of the entire conflict. Now, what was that sign? What does Moses do in Exodus 7:10 to try and convince Pharaoh to let the people go? He turns his staff into a snake. Now remember that the staff was a symbol of Moses' power and priesthood. And that's kind of an interesting sign for God to use when you stop and think about it. Why start with that? And one possible theory here, perhaps God knew that this was a common trick of the Egyptian sorcerers and the magicians. He knew that they could do the same thing and was anticipating the false priesthood to come in and mimic the same act, which they promptly do in the next verse. And that might cause you to wonder, how are these sorcerers able to do this? And I'm not sure. Maybe with sleight of hand. I'm an amateur magician, and I know that it is possible to make the impossible appear possible. Maybe they're doing it through some measure of demonic power, or maybe God is just allowing them to do it so that he can send his message through what Moses does next. So what happens in 7:12? Moses' snake eats or devours their snakes. Now, what do you think the message is in that? Just ponder that. Keep that in mind as we study the rest of the story. And we'll come back to that question later. So now, the plagues themselves. That little sign of the snakes is not going to be enough to convince Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. It's going to take a lot more. Now, as a teacher, I'm not as concerned about going over each of the plagues themselves and talking about the damage that they cause or what the people experienced, as much as I am about the message that God was sending through the plagues. But it's not a bad idea to review them first and have them marked in your scriptures. And you can do that with this secret message activity. The secret message at the bottom is going to reveal one of the great purposes of the plagues, or the message that God was sending to the Egyptians. And the secret message at the bottom is going to reveal one of the great purposes of the plagues, or the message that God was sending to the Egyptians, and consequently to all of us. So, here are the answers. Moses turned the water of the Nile into blood. The land was covered with frogs. The dust of the land was turned into lice. Moses sent forth large swarms of flies. A disease came upon all the cattle of Egypt, and they died. The Egyptians themselves became covered with boils. There was a great storm of hail mixed with fire or lightning that killed people, plants, and animals. Moses called a swarm of locusts that covered the whole land and ate everything that was left. A thick darkness covered the land. And then the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. And that sounds terrible, doesn't it? It's hard to imagine a heart so hard as to continue to deny a God with that measure of power. And what's the secret message there at the bottom, or one of the great principles of the plagues? It's the statement that God initially makes to Moses before he ever even goes into Pharaoh. And this comes right from the scriptures. It's found in Exodus chapter 7, verse 5. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. They're going to know whose power is greater. The gods of the Egyptians were no match for Jehovah. The plagues can be seen as a direct challenge to their gods. The Egyptians worship the Nile. Well, Jehovah turns it into blood. Which, by the way, probably doesn't mean he actually turned the Nile into B positive or A negative, because blood in the scriptures can also be translated as disease or poison. The waters of the Nile probably became undrinkable or would cause sickness in those that drank it. The Egyptians worshipped the earth. Well, Jehovah took the dust of it and turned it into lice. The Egyptians had a frog goddess, a cattle god, a god of crops, a god of healing. Well, Jehovah was able to confront each and every one with a power that showed his dominance and control over each, because they weren't gods at all. The greatest god of the Egyptians was Ra, or the sun god. And Jehovah was able to just black him out for 3 days. And then Pharaoh himself was considered a god to the Egyptians. But even he couldn't save his own son from the destroyer. Now, do you remember the very first thing Moses did when he initially came into Pharaoh? He turned his staff into a snake, which devoured the snakes of the Egyptian sorcerers. And what did you feel the sign or the message of that sign was? Right from the outset, God showed Pharaoh that Moses' power, or Moses' God, was greater than theirs. That Moses' God could consume their gods. Keep in mind, the Egyptians were very proud of their gods. I mean, just look at what they left behind. Giant, enormous statues of them. I've been to Egypt. It's impressive. The scale of their accomplishments is mind-boggling, especially considering the technology that they had available to them. Pictures really just don't do it justice. The pyramids, Luxor, Abu Simbel, these places stand as an incredible testament to what man can do, the power of man. But they're still the works of man. And their gods were merely gods of stone, gods of their own imagination and creating. But Jehovah was God, the real God. And the power of the gods of men are no match for his. Now look how many times he sends that message throughout these chapters. Take a colored pencil and mark each time and way that he says it. We've already got the first one in chapter 7, verse 5. But also look at chapter 7, 17. In this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Chapter 8, verse 10. That thou mayest know that there is none like unto the Lord our God. 8:22. To the end thou mayest know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. 9:14. That thou mayest know that there is none like me in all the earth. 9:29. That thou mayest know how that the earth is the Lord's. And 10:2, that ye may know how that I am the Lord. That's the message. That's the great message of the plagues. Jehovah is God. The great I am. God is greater and more powerful than all the gods of this world. He's stronger. There's none like unto him. That's the conclusion that Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, comes to later in the story. After the Israelites have been freed from bondage, he declares, Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods. For in the thing wherein they dealt proudly, he was above them. And that message is not only sent for the benefit of the Egyptians, but the children of Israel too, as well as all of us who read and study these chapters. Well, what does this mean for you and I? More than likely, none of you out there are ever going to be tempted to bow down to idols of stone or pictures of men with bird or cow heads. But in our modern world, I feel we're still tempted just as much to worship the gods of this world as the Egyptians were, the man-made gods. What do I mean? What are some of the gods of our world? We may not be tempted to bow down to statues of Osiris or Odin or Zeus, but what kinds of things or ideas do people place before God? What do they worship? What do they prioritize over him and his laws? Maybe a few ideas. Some worship money. Others, success. Others, popularity, fame. You've got the gods of lust, pride, sex, partying. Some worship cars, sports, celebrities, or leisure. And when we prioritize these worldly things over the commandments and the works of God, we are, in a sense, worshiping the gods of this world. We might be tempted to think that we'll find more happiness, fulfillment, or meaning in these things. But what did the story of the plagues just teach us? God is greater than those things. The goodness and greatness and power of God can consume those things. Eventually, all are going to discover that those gods can't save us. They don't deliver on their promises. They won't make us happy or offer us fulfillment. All of God's children need to come to this conclusion. We all need to come to know the Lord, and that there is none like him in all the earth. C.S. Lewis once observed this. He said, "What Satan put into the heads of our remote ancestors was the idea that they could be like gods, could set up on their own as if they had created themselves, be their own masters, invent some sort of happiness for themselves outside God, apart from God. And out of that hopeless attempt has come nearly all that we call human history: money, poverty, ambition, war, prostitution, classes, empires, slavery. The long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy." That reliance on something else was like the Egyptians hoping that their statues and rituals could save them from the power of Jehovah. Now, some questions to ask ourselves. Do we live our lives as if we believe that principle, that God is greater than anything? What experiences have you had that have taught you that God and His gospel are greater than anything the world has to offer? Personally, I've read great novels and biographies and works of nonfiction, but they're nothing compared to what I've experienced in the Scriptures. I've enjoyed concerts and performances and sporting events in my life, but they're nothing compared to the experience I have sitting in church or watching General Conference. I've looked with awe and wonder at incredible works of architecture and art and sculpture conceived by the mind and hand of my fellow man. But they're nothing compared with the mountains and canyons and oceans and forests of my Heavenly Father's creation. And I'm sad to admit that at times in my life, I've fallen prey to the temptations and priorities and enticements of this world. And I can tell you from personal experience that the meager wages that they offer pale in comparison to the great rewards that God offers. So I pray that we can all come to the same conclusion as Jethro, that God is above all. And I testify that our lives will be better, more fulfilling, happier, if we'll act as if we understand that. If not, I'm afraid that we may have to suffer some plague-like consequences in our lives. But hopefully we can be wiser than that. We can trust the Scriptures and the Lord's prophets, whose counsel and teachings can deliver us from the grasp of these false deities. God is greater. He always wins. Now, a companion principle. What will recognizing God's power do for us? There's another idea that's emphasized in these plague chapters, and let's see if you can find it. Study the following verses and tell me what you feel their common message is. What's the pattern in the plagues? 8:22 through 23, 9:4 and 6, 9:11, 9:20 through 21, 9:26, 10:22 through 23, and 11:7. Right, so 8:22 through 23, with the plague of flies. "And I will sever in that day the land of Goshen, in the which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, to the end thou mayest know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. And I will put a division between my people and thy people. Tomorrow shall this sign be." Chapter 9, verses 4 and 6, with the plague of the disease among the cattle. "And the Lord shall sever between the cattle of Israel and the cattle of Egypt, and there shall nothing die of all that is the children of Israel's. And the Lord did that thing on the morrow, and all the cattle of Egypt died. But of the cattle of the children of Israel died not one." Chapter 9, verse 11, with the boils. Who did they affect? "And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boil was upon the magicians, and upon all the Egyptians." 9:20 through 21. This is interesting. When it came to the hailstorm, some of the Egyptians, by this time, have been convinced of God and Moses' power. So, he that feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his cattle flee into the houses. And he that regarded not the word of the Lord left his servants and his cattle in the field. So therefore, when the hail comes, those that feared him or believed in Moses, their cattle was spared. Those that didn't lost their cattle. And then, chapter 9, verse 26, only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, was there no hail. Chapter 10, 22 through 23, and Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. And then 11:7, with the plague of the death of the firstborn, Moses prophesies, but against any of the children of Israel shall not a dog move his tongue against man or beast, that ye may know how that the Lord doth put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. Now, what did you notice? What's the pattern? Those that chose Jehovah and to follow his prophet did not suffer from the plagues. There was a difference between the Israelites and the Egyptians, a severance in their experiences. Now, what's the truth that the scriptures have just taught us? If I blank, then what? You could put it this way. If I choose the Lord and follow his prophets, then I will not suffer from the plagues of this world. Let's take a look at that truth a little deeper. What are some of the plagues of the earth today? I'll give you one of the gods of this world, and you tell me what plagues accompany their worship. The god of alcohol, drugs, and tobacco. There are those who worship these gods daily. What plagues accompany their worship? Addiction, disease, hangovers, DUIs, accidents. How about the god of sensuality or sexuality? STDs, unwanted pregnancies, abortion, meaningless relationships? How about the god of anger? The plague of violence, crime, prison, pain. How about the god of money? Materialism, financial ruin, regret over lost opportunities because money has been such a focus, obsession, selfishness. And then, overall, those that choose the gods of this world will more often than not suffer from the plagues of misery, despair, and emptiness. But if I choose God and his prophets, I'll be spared those plagues. There will be a difference between us and them. And is that true? You tell me, do those who follow the word of wisdom suffer from the plagues of substance addiction, hangovers, or DUIs? No, there's a difference between them. Do those who live the law of chastity have to worry about the plagues of STDs or unwanted pregnancy or abortion? No, there's a difference. Do those who live the gospel of peacemaking suffer from the fallout of violence and anger? No, there's a difference. Do those who strive to live the gospel suffer from the plagues of sin-induced misery, regret, and meaninglessness? No, there's a difference. And that's not to say that the righteous don't suffer in life, or face challenges, or have discouraging times. In fact, sometimes righteousness can make our lives more difficult. But the quality and the nature of that suffering is very different. The suffering of common mortality, or the suffering of the persecution of the righteous, has a redeeming, heaven-like quality to it. The suffering of sin is, well, just suffering. wickedness never was happiness. But if we just live the commandments and follow the prophet, then the plagues of this world will have no effect on us. We'll be protected, separate, severed from the spiritual pandemics of this world. And is that true in your life? Name a law of God that you're grateful for, and what plagues has it protected you from? For me, I'm grateful for the law of sacrifice. That law has helped to protect me from the plagues of self-centeredness, materialism, and pride. Every time I make the sacrifices asked of tithing, service, fasting, temple work, I feel great. I feel happy. It offers real meaning to my life. By putting something and someone other than myself first, I receive peace and fulfillment in return. One thing I find interesting, what state in the United States is statistically ranked as being the happiest? It's Utah. Fascinating. The state with the highest percentage of members of the restored church is the happiest, collectively speaking. Now, that's not to suggest that every member of the church is happy and that everyone that's not a member of the church is miserable. But I do believe that there is a direct correlation between living gospel principles and happiness. So what's the message here? Make a world of difference. Avoid the plagues like the plague. Choose God. And I can assure you that if you will, there will be a vast difference between your life experience and the experiences of those that worship the gods of this world. Another brief insight from these chapters, something that struck me as I studied this time, was the number of the plagues. God sends them 10. 10. He gives them 9 chances before he finally lets them really have it with the death of the firstborn. What does that tell you about your Heavenly Father? God is patient, very patient. He's long-suffering. He's not quick to judge or to destroy. He tries many different ways and many times to get us to change before things get really bad. There was a pause between each one of the plagues where Moses goes in and asks, Pharaoh, are you going to change? Are you going to let my people go? No? Okay, prepare for the next one. All right, now are you going to change and let my people go? No? Okay, here comes the next one. And I sense a bit of progression in the plagues. He starts out easy on them. In fact, the first thing he tries is just giving them a sign with the snakes. But then the Lord seems to progress from irritations to destructions to death. The water to blood, the lice, the frogs, uncomfortable, but not devastating. Then he ups the ante a little bit. The cattle die. The hail destroys their crops. Well, that hits the old pocketbook. That's a bit more painful. And then the boils, they feel those directly in their own bodies. And then, after all of that, comes the death of the firstborn. But not until he's tried 9 other things first, all of which could be recovered from. And honestly, I believe that if they had changed earlier, God would have stopped them. It's not as if God's plan was to use all 10 no matter what. He had to continue sending them because Pharaoh continued to harden his heart. And that's an important JST change. Every time it says that the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, the JST changes it to Pharaoh hardening his heart. This isn't predestination, that Pharaoh had to deny Moses so that this would happen. Pharaoh had his agency just like the rest of us. And I believe that God is willing to be just as patient with us as he was with Pharaoh. He's going to try many ways and give us many chances to change. It reminds me of Laman and Lemuel. Think of that story. How many different ways and times did he give Laman and Lemuel chances to change before Nephi finally leaves and separates from them. God is a God of patience and long-suffering. All right, now let's zero in on chapters 12 and 13. And as an icebreaker, I remind my students that we often use symbols to represent complex ideas or messages. You can see this in the emojis we use in our texts and emails nowadays. Symbols can be a simple yet effective means of communication. So I challenge my students to see if they recognize the following symbols and what they mean. So this one, that means peace. Infinity. Yin and yang, or the Japanese symbol for balance. Female. Here's one from technology. This would be a USB port. And then power. And what about this one? Superman? No, but remember, it's not an S. It's a symbol for hope, right? What about scriptural symbols? Now, see if they can match the following common scriptural symbols with what they're traditionally associated with. Chains are a symbol for sin. The sword, truth, or the Word of God. The serpent, Satan. Fire, the Holy Spirit. The color purple is a symbol for royalty. The color white, for innocence and purity. Green, life and well-being. And then when we see the number 7, that suggests wholeness or completeness. Now, this skill of interpreting symbols is going to be key to our understanding and the personal application of the book of Exodus. It's something that we're going to be doing a lot of in the next couple of weeks. So let's put our symbolism interpreting skills into practice by examining one of the most symbolically rich practices in the entire Bible, the Passover. The Passover was an ordinance instituted by Moses here in Exodus chapter 12 that would forever after teach those that observed it truths about God and life, and help them remember God's power in delivering them from Egypt. That's why we continue to do ordinances in the church today. They aren't just mere rituals. They have meaning. They're designed to teach us and help us remember things. So let's see what the Passover can teach us. And the first thing we need to do is identify the symbols themselves before we can interpret them. So look for the symbols in the following verses. What elements of the Passover do you think might be symbolic? And you could do this with your students as a handout. Now, as you do this, if you don't feel that you see anything in one of these verses, don't worry, just leave it blank. And also keep in mind that some of the verses are going to have more than just one symbol in them. So see how many you can get. And I'll show you what I see here. In 12:1, the land of Egypt is a symbol. In 12:2, a new calendar began. It says there that the Passover would signify the beginning of the new year, that month would now be the first month of the year. In verses 3 through 5, the sacrifice of a male lamb without blemish, or of the first year, or a young lamb. Verse 7, you've got the blood of that lamb, and also in that verse, that blood marking the doorposts. In verse 8, 3 things here, 3 things that they're going to eat at the Passover meal. They're going to eat the meat of the lamb, roast with fire, unleavened bread, and bitter herbs. In verse 10, they're instructed to fully eat the meat, all of it, and leave nothing behind. In verse 11, they were to eat in haste, quickly, with their loins girt and their staff in hand. Verse 12, you've got the smiting of the firstborn being the thing that actually frees them from Egypt. And then verse 13, those who followed those instructions had the plague pass over them. Now this is where it gets really fun, the interpretation. You can have a really great discussion with your class about what these symbols could mean. And that's what's going to make the lesson relevant to us. If we were to combine all of the elements of the Passover into one summary sentence, it could go something like this. While living in the bondage of Egypt, the Israelites were asked to begin a new calendar by sacrificing a young male lamb without blemish. They placed the blood of that lamb on the doorposts of their home, would roast the lamb with fire, and eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They were to eat it completely, with haste, as if they were ready to leave quickly. And if they were obedient to this instruction, the destroyer would pass by them, and they would be freed from their bondage. And from that point on, they were to remember that miracle frequently by observing this ordinance yearly. Now, we could add some more elements to this, but that'll suffice. Now let's take each underlined element and exchange it with its symbolic meaning so that it applies to us. So first, the bondage of Egypt. What does that represent? What do chains and slavery and bondage usually represent in the Scriptures? Sin. Sin makes us slaves to the adversary. We lose our agency in consequences and addictions and loss of freedoms. And who can we compare the Israelites to? Us. Let's compare their experiences to our own, because we too are considered to be a part of the house of Israel, or the Lord's covenant people. Now, why would the Passover be celebrated as the first month of the year? That month would be the first month of the year from then on. Well, what do we usually associate with the new year? Renewal, change, a fresh start. What is life like when we leave the bondage of sin? It's a new life, the beginning of something better, purer, and happier. But what is it that's going to make that new life possible? Well, let's move on to the blood of the Lamb. Who do you think the Lamb represents? And I'm sure most of you got this one. Who is referred to as the Lamb of God in the Scriptures? And that would be Jesus Christ. Remember that the law of Moses pointed people towards Christ. Alma taught that in Alma 34, verse 14. And behold, this is the whole meaning of the law of Moses, every whit pointing to that great and last sacrifice. And that great and last sacrifice will be the Son of God, yea, infinite and eternal. And that lamb was to be a young male lamb without blemish. Why? Because Christ would be a young man that would live his life without sin, without blemish. Then what would the blood of the lamb represent? That's the symbol for his atoning sacrifice. Jesus would shed his blood in Gethsemane and on Golgotha and would be slain for the sins and sufferings of the world. When the destroyer came to the homes of the people with the blood of the Lamb marked on them, it would pass over their homes and not slay them. Now that blood was placed on the doorposts of their homes. This one's a little bit tougher. Why the doorposts? The doorposts were a symbol for everyday life. Every day you leave your home by going through the doorway and out into the world to do your labor. And every night you would return back through that same doorway to rest and eat. Doorways are focal points. You can't get to your food and family and bed without passing through the doorway. It was a place where you would be sure to see something. Like if there's something that you want to remember to bring to work or wherever you're going, you might place it in front of the door because you'll be sure to see it on your way out. The purifying, sanctifying power of the blood of Christ's atonement is something that we need how often? Every day. It's not just a one-time thing. We need the power of Christ's atoning blood every day. Another possible interpretation, the blood would have been very visible to anybody who passed by that person's home. Hopefully, we too are not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, but display our commitment to him to the world boldly and without reservation. Now, there's some powerful symbolism in what the Israelites would eat at the Passover. There were 3 things that they ate: the meat of the lamb, unleavened bread, and bitter herbs. First of all, the act of eating is symbolic. When we eat something, it gets inside us. It nourishes us. It sustains us. It keeps us alive. So they were to eat the flesh of the lamb, to get it inside them. What does Christ want us to do with him? His character, his lifestyle, his attributes, his sacrifice? To get it down inside us, to make it a part of our lives. I believe that's why we eat and drink in the sacrament, the symbols of his sacrifice, to be nourished and sustained by him. The meat was to be roasted with fire. Fire is a purifying and cleansing agent in the Scriptures. It burns out impurities. We boil water to purify it. We cook meat to make it palatable and safe. Fire is almost always a symbol for the Holy Ghost in the Scriptures. The Spirit of God, like a fire, is burning. We take Christ and the Holy Ghost together to sanctify and purify ourselves. What about the unleavened bread? What would that symbolize? Leaven is yeast. And what effect does yeast have on bread? Say that's the difference between a piece of bread and a tortilla or a cracker. Bread is going to go bad much more quickly. It spoils within a very short amount of time. Unleavened bread, on the other hand, endures. It lasts. Bread is a common symbol for the Word of God in the Scriptures, or his doctrine. Jesus Christ called on that symbolism frequently. He said, "Beware the leaven of the Pharisees." But in Christ, in the doctrine of Christ, there is no corruption, no spoilage, no fermenting. It endures and is unchanging. And just take a look at verse 19. There wasn't even supposed to be any leaven in the entire house. How completely does God want us to rid ourselves of the doctrines of the world? Get rid of all of it. Take that which is spoiling in your house and get it out. And the bitter herbs, that was to remind them of the bitterness of bondage. And that's an important thing to keep in mind too. Sometimes when we repent, after a time, we begin to forget the bitterness of the sin. We may even be tempted to make the mistake of returning to those sins. The bitter herbs would help them to remember the unpleasantness of their slavery. And that's going to be a theme that we see later in the Exodus. The children of Israel are going to struggle with the desire to return to Egypt. They do that because they begin to forget the bitterness of bondage. They were to eat the meat of the lamb completely and not leave anything left over. How should we accept Christ and his doctrine into our lives? Wholly, fully, entirely, with no half measures, not picking and choosing which commandments we want to keep and the ones we wish to ignore. We need to completely accept his gospel. The Israelites were to eat the meal with haste, with their loins girt, staff in hand, ready to go. Why? Because they were going to be leaving that night. How quickly does God want us to flee sin? As quickly as we can. Like Joseph of Egypt from Potiphar's wife. flee and get you out. Also, as soon as the destroyer passes through Egypt, what happened? Read chapter 12, verses 31 through 33. And he, Pharaoh, called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, Rise up and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go, serve the Lord as ye have said. Also, take your flocks and your herds, as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people, that they might send them out of the land in haste. For they said, We be all dead men. Therefore, how fast can the Savior's sacrifice work for us? Immediately. As soon as we call upon the power of Christ's blood, it can instantly have a saving effect on us. How fast did it work for Alma the Younger? Immediately. He taught that in Alma 34, verse 31. Yea, I would that ye would come forth, and harden not your hearts any longer. For behold, now is the time and the day of your salvation. And therefore, if you will repent and harden not your hearts, immediately shall the great plan of redemption be brought about unto you. The blood of the Lamb immediately protected the Israelites from the power of the destroyer. Now, who is the great destroyer of life and love and happiness? That would be Satan. He's the destroyer of all good things. Christ's sacrifice protects us from his influence, though. His blood overcomes the effects of both sin and death in our lives. And it was this final plague that made it possible for the children of Israel to escape Egypt. And what did we already decide Egypt represented? Sin, the bondage of sin. It was the death of the firstborn that allowed them to leave and live. Now, do you see the parallel there? Jesus was the firstborn of our heavenly parents. He's our older brother. His death and sacrifice and blood made our escape possible. Now, if we put all these symbols together, we come up with a new sentence, one that is relevant and applicable to us. We could word it like this: while living in the world, I can begin a new life through the sacrifice of Christ. If I rely on his atonement in my daily life, have the Spirit, be nourished by the eternal Word of God, and remember the bitterness of sin, and flee from it quickly. If I am obedient to this instruction, then the destructive power of Satan will pass by me, and I will be free from the slavery of sin and death. This is where I'll interrupt our sentence and make another observation. We, as disciples of Jehovah, don't observe the ordinance of the Passover anymore. Why not? Well, because the sacrifice of Christ's atonement has now been made. Now, we don't look forward to this miracle, we look back at it. And therefore, we observe a new ordinance. And what would that ordinance be? The sacrament. The Passover was the ordinance that looked forward to Christ's atonement. The sacrament is the ordinance that looks back. But its message is very similar. Go to Exodus 13:3 at what Moses says after the people are freed. And Moses said unto the people, Remember this day, in which ye came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand the Lord brought you out from this place. There shall no leavened bread be eaten. And that's the major message of Exodus chapter 13. Remember this day. Don't forget what the Lord has done for you. Because when you begin to forget what the Lord has done for you, that's when problems start. And in verse 14, he says, And it shall be when thy son asketh thee in time to come, saying, What is this? That thou shalt say unto him, By strength of hand the Lord brought us out from Egypt, from the house of bondage. So always remember this and teach it to your children. Let this ordinance be observed every year so that you can remember the miracle of the Passover. Now, we observe that ordinance more than once a year. Maybe in the last days we need to be reminded a little more frequently. We remember that sacrifice every week. Therefore, to complete our sentence, from this point on, I can remember this miracle by observing the sacrament weekly. We're baptized once. We're ordained to an office of the priesthood once. We're endowed once, for ourselves at least. But how often do we partake of the sacrament? Every week, because we need it every week. I mean, have you ever looked down at the sacrament and passed it along saying, well, don't need it this week? I've never had that experience. Instead, I'm grateful that I can call on the blood of Christ every week, because every week I fall short. There are many aspects and applications of the atonement that are taught all over the Scriptures. But if there was one particular message that I would emphasize from the story of the Passover, it would be the freeing power of the atonement. It was the blood of the Lamb that made it possible for them to escape. It gave them a new life. It gave them freedom. It gave them hope. The sacrifice of Christ gives us the same thing. We too might find ourselves languishing in the bonds of sin, whether that's an addiction, a devastating consequence that has come into our lives because of a poor choice, the guilt or shame that we feel for our past mistakes, the despair and darkness that accompanies wrongdoing. Let me assure you that the blood of the Lamb can free us from all of that. No matter how powerful we feel the grasp of the oppressor is, there is a way out. There is hope. Just imagine how the children of Israel must have felt as they walked away from the land of Egypt, as they dropped their burdens, left the whippings of their taskmasters, and joyfully turned from their bricks to walk towards freedom. I hope that we feel the same thing as we partake of the sacrament, as we apply the atonement. I hope that we remember that as we commemorate our ordinance of his sacrifice. Remember in the blessing of the sacrament that we make a covenant to always remember him. I've usually taken that to mean that I should think about Jesus during the sacrament, his life, his teachings, his sacrifice, and be grateful for them. And we should do that. But remember that we take the sacrament as sinners, as people who have found ourselves slipping back into the bondage of sin. And that can be quite discouraging, especially when placed against the backdrop of Jesus' perfect life. But that's why I think that he whispers to us in that moment as we take that cup of water and that little piece of bread to our lips. He says, always remember me. Remember me in hope. Remember what my blood does for you. It frees you. Don't forget that. Don't dwell on the memory of the bondage. Don't look back to Egypt. Look forward to freedom, the freedom that my blood offers you. Look forward to your promised land. My blood is going to help get you there. My blood is going to protect you from all the evils of Egypt, of the world, of sin. And to help your students feel the power of that message, music can often speak in ways that mere words can't. So I encourage my students to sing a hymn or show a performance of a hymn that can help them focus on Christ and his atoning sacrifice. Some possible suggestions? I know that my Redeemer lives. How great thou art. I stand all amazed. Or one of my favorites that's not found in the hymn book, Amazing Grace. And there are 2 video recommendations I have for that hymn, and I'll provide the links to them in the video description. There's one performed by the Tabernacle Choir, and the other from a musical group made up of members of the church called Gentry. They're both really great. And the line from this hymn that really stands out to me, especially in relation to the story of the Exodus. My chains are gone. I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And while they listen or sing, have them ponder the following question. What effect has the blood of the slain lamb had on your life? Well, I bear witness that Christ lives, that the Passover principle applies to us too, that his blood has the power to free us from bondage, to set us free from the chains and the slavery of the adversary. I believe in Christ and am forever grateful for his sacrifice. At the beginning of this lesson, we said that one of the major things the Lord wanted his people to gain from this episode in this Bible story was to come to know him. This is part of the way we come to know Christ. We come to know him through the ordinances of his atonement, through the lessons of the Passover and the sacrament. My chains are gone. I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And that's our lesson for today, my friends. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for spending this time to study with me in the Scriptures today. Now, for those of you that are teachers, if you would like access to the resources that I make to help you prepare lessons, go to teachingwithpower.com and you'll find the links there. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that. If you found the video helpful in any way, recommend it to somebody that you feel it might help. Thank you so much for watching. Now get out there and teach with power.